So good afternoon and welcome to this GIRI forum, which is addressing the question as to how diversity in all its various forms can help to reduce error in the construction industry. Just a first reminder, the presentation today is being recorded. Your initial reaction may have been that it's a bit of a stretch, this diversity in error, but I can assure you by the end of this session, your eyes will be open to the impact this subject can have on our daily operations and outputs. Please join in as much as you can and contribute to the discussions. We're setting up breakout rooms so that you can have a go at talking about the subject. And don't forget, though, that we are looking at this through the GIRI lens, focusing on error reduction. Now, I'm going to run through a brief introduction to GIRI for those of you who are not familiar with us, and apologies to our seasoned GIRI forum veterans in that respect. And then I'm handing over to Nick. On the housekeeping front, can I ask you to mute your microphones if you're not speaking, but remember to turn them back on in the breakout rooms. If you don't mind, please leave on your video, because that way we feel the meeting has more vitality. And I think Nick does a bit of waving and stuff later. Any questions as we go through, please use the chat box, and Nick or I will try to pick up at the end any questions, or we'll get back to you after the meeting. And if you have any technical problems, the usual advice, turn off and turn back on again. In other words, leave the meeting and then rejoin using the same link. I think that covers the housekeeping issues. So we could be free again soon. Well, that's a bit of a relief, isn't it? Face-to-face meetings, networking, and all the other personal interactions that are so important to our species. There's no doubt the lockdowns have honed some of our technical skills, and the efficiencies of the virtual meetings are here to stay. We're pushing on with our GIRI forums, and we're intending to continue to provide valuable and interesting advice and comment on best practices to avoid error. We remain committed to industry improvement and the benefits an error-free culture can bring. There is not just the headline productivity benefit, but also the positive impact on quality, safety, and sustainability. Now, many of you will be familiar with GIRI to a greater or lesser extent, but I think it's worth just reflecting on some of the key points about the origins of our thinking and our key messaging. Our original research into the cost of error and its causes led to the publication of our strategy for change, with the objective of generating a significant change in the efficiency of the UK construction industry through reducing the amount of errors made. Now, this research, carried out in 2016, was funded jointly by industry and the CITB. The results showed how much waste was caused by error, 21%. Now, this was in a cost context, and this diagram just gives some details on that. The direct cost of error, the direct resources that we have in dealing with error, is 5%. Indirect cost, these are the follow-on and the impact on other parties, 7%. Unrecorded process waste, which is where errors are occurring, but nobody reports them or says anything about them. They just spend their time putting things right and then moving on. But of course, that causes the same sort of impacts. And then the latent defects are those problems which occur after projects are handed over. Now, 21%, that's a big number, and the construction turnover per annum, what are we doing? About 100 billion, maybe 110. So 21 billion pounds is wasted each year through making mistakes. Now, I think if we're making, certainly major contractors, I would think making 2 or 3% profit, they'll be thinking, whoopee do, it must be Christmas. And this 21% is a whole order of magnitude higher. So it doesn't take much to think we should be, it's a sort of no-brainer, isn't it? So our research also identified the top 10 root causes of error. Our activities following the result of the research have been targeted on these highest ranking causes. For example, design features frequently in the list, so we produced a guide to increase value by avoiding error in design. The guide is available to download from our website. GIRI also developed training courses covering leadership, interface management and supervisory training, targeted on the cultural change needed to avoid error. These courses are CITB accredited, which means they qualify levy players to receive grants, and are available again via our website. So what are GIRI's aims and objectives? Originally, we secured funding to carry out the research project. The report showed how much could be gained by a structured approach to improving error reduction. These were our 5 key aims. Create a culture and working environment to get things right from the start. Change attitudes and harness leadership. Engage all stakeholders in the construction industry in eliminating error from inception to completion. Sharing knowledge about error reduction and best practices and systems. And of course, improving skills across the sector to create a positive approach. Strategically then, to improve construction productivity and quality and reduce costs and waste by eliminating error. Alongside the clear productivity gains, saving of time and money, we also recognise the benefits on safety. An Australian study found that 37% of accidents occur during rework, and carbon footprint, in that the waste of resources, both material and physical, is avoided if we don't have to do the same job more than once. We believe in avoiding errors throughout the project cycle. This includes after handover. We continually need to ask ourselves whether it is an error to design and construct buildings and infrastructure that have a greater negative effect on our environment than is necessary or reasonable. So this is just a reminder of the next GIRI members meeting, which is on Thursday, the 1st of July at 9:30. We're hoping to hold it at the Institution of Civil Engineers, but the online option remains until Boris has declared on the 21st of June. So we need to have the right culture throughout the industry so that people feel empowered to act in ways which reduce error to the mutual benefit of all those involved. We need to change the way we work and behave now. If we do that, we will have an industry that is more cost effective and has a better reputation. And with that, I'd just like to hand over to Nick so we can think about today's theme. Thanks, Nick.
Great, thanks very much, Cliff. Thank you. Well, hello everybody. If you're able to turn your cameras on, please do so. I'd love to see you all. There's some familiar faces out there, and also some familiar names that I haven't seen for a while. So good to see those names. Hello. Right, what we're going to do today is look at diversity, and I will share my screen to show you the journey that we're going to go on today. So this is the big whiteboard that we're going to be following, and we're going to try and answer a number of questions. So the first thing we're going to do is look at this question. Why diversity? Why are we talking about this? Why is this a hot topic? We're then going to have a look at a case study to see some of the unexpected consequences of diversity or lack of diversity. And we're then going to put you into breakout groups and get you to think about how does diversity of thought relate to error. So drawing on the lessons from the case study and relating it into our sector. We're then going to have a look at how GIRI promotes diversity of thought. So what does GIRI do to get diversity of thought from the teams we already have? We will then have a look at a second case study to see some other examples of how diversity influences decision making. And then we'll consider the perspectives that the construction industry might be missing. So what perspectives do we need, and what perspectives have we got at the moment? We'll then have a divergence into a bit of biology, not something many of us engineers spend a lot of time thinking about, but then you never know, there might be something we can learn from nature. And then we'll think about how can we see the world differently, and finish off with the sort of million-dollar question: how do we increase diversity in order to reduce error? So try and draw together everything that we have discussed and into the so what question. So what do we do now? So the first thing on that list was to answer this question: why diversity? Now, I have been flying around this whiteboard, and what I'm going to do in a moment is invite you all into this whiteboard. Some of you will be familiar with it, but this is Mural. So it's an online whiteboard platform. What I will do is I will share a link in the chat box. If you click on the link, a window should automatically open up, and you can then interact in the whiteboard. If it doesn't happen automatically, try copying and pasting the link into a web browser, and that should work. If it doesn't work, don't worry, you can still participate fully in the session. Once you're into Mural, navigate to this top corner here. You can see there's a icon in the bottom of the screen, bottom right hand of the screen, that shows you where you are. You can zoom in and out like that, and you can click with your mouse and drag around, and I've got a scrolly mouse, so I'll zoom in. Now, when you get in here, what I'd like you to do, please, is to try and answer these questions on a sticky note. So the first question is, who are we trying to include? So when we talk about diversity, think of who are we trying to include, and why are we trying to include them? So please stick some answers on this sticky note. It's just a quick, I want to hear your thoughts. So this is the icon you're looking for. So go to the left-hand side of the screen, click on that one, that text icon, grab a sticky note, pull it in, and I'm just, as an example, I'm going to say people with brown hair. And the reason that we want to engage with them, I'll grab another sticky note and I'll say because they have great ideas. And I'll even try and spell it correctly. There we go. Okay. There we go. Right. So because they have great ideas. So what I'm going to do now, oops, let's click the share, start annotating. I'm not quite sure what's happened there. Start annotating. I want to stop annotating. There we go. So I'm going to now click share, press visitor link, copy that link, and I'm going to share that in the text box. So not the text box, the chat box. There we go. I'll share that with everyone. So if you go to the chat box now and click on that link, you will get invited into this Mural board. So everyone, if you can all click on that link now, please, and I should start to see you all appearing. There we go. We've got a couple of you appearing. And what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen because you're all in the board, and I'll just give you 2 minutes, please, to put some post-it notes on there, and I will grab you to make sure you're all in the right part of the screen. Here we go. So I'm just summoning you all so you're up at the correct corner of the board. And I'll set the timer, and I'll just give us 2 minutes to see what answers you think of to those questions. Who are we trying to include, and why are we trying to include them? So if anyone's having any problems getting in, give me a shout and I might be able to help. I will just share my screen so anyone who's not anyone who's not in the mural can see what's going on. That's a very useful point. Thank you. Yeah, people who find online platforms difficult. Well, hopefully we'll do plenty of verbal interaction as well, so you're not going to have to stare too attentively at the screen. Great. Okay. Well, thank you. I can see some interesting answers coming up there. So what I'll do is you're welcome to keep looking at Mural, but also if you come back to WebEx, you'll see the screen that I'm looking at. So we'll all be looking at the same thing. So if you just minimize Mural with the little bar at the top right-hand corner, and then we'll all be looking at the same thing. So let's have a look at some of those answers. So let's have a look. We've got this answer here. We need to try and include everyone. It's the fairest thing to do. Okay, interesting. Diversity is a fact. All humans have different abilities, experiences, and viewpoints. If we're creating infrastructure, it should not create barriers to any human being able to build, operate, maintain, use. Okay, so we've got a couple of things there, haven't we? One about it's inherently fair. Another about the output that we're producing. We need to remember that the output is for everyone. We need to include people of all ages, inclusion of diverse experience and knowledge. This is a big one. It isn't civil engineering if it doesn't extend to all society. To help get views which otherwise would be lost, consideration to everyone, inclusion of diverse experience. Okay, so it sounds like we've got a fairly consistent sort of message there. We need to consider the inverse. How do we check people aren't excluded? Very interesting. Okay, well, hopefully you've had a chance to look at those different perspectives. So when we think about diversity, generally, there tend to be three arguments. We start off with legal. There is a legal requirement not to discriminate. You know, there are protected characteristics, so all our businesses need to make sure that we don't discriminate based on age, disability, gender, marriage, race, religion, and all those other protected characteristics. So we know the law says we must do it, so that's pretty straightforward. But there's also a moral perspective, that idea of fairness, that we need to make sure we aren't being unfair to anyone. And it would be nice to think that the law and morality were some way aligned. So that's a discussion for another day. But we've got the legal argument, we've got the moral argument. But we've also got a business argument, our effectiveness, a business financial argument. And that possibly ties in with the comment about civil engineering is for everyone. Our outputs need to be suitable for everyone. Now, this is the area I want to focus on for the rest of today, is directly linking our effectiveness, our business outputs, our ability to do work, and how diversity links to that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a very quick look at a case study. So we're going to fly across the ocean and look at a case study from the CIA. So maybe not an obvious candidate. Those of you who have read Rebel Ideas will recognise this case study. So the CIA have an extremely rigorous selection process, and they have always been very clear that they want the very best people. They have never said we will discriminate. They always say we want the very best. So they came up with a selection process, and they wanted the fittest people, the strongest people, the cleverest people, the most resilient people. You know, they wanted the best individuals they could find. So what they did was they came up with a recruitment process, and anyone could apply, and whoever scores best, you know, in this case represented by a bigger circle, they're the ones that they would pick. So you could say, well, this is a pure meritocracy. Everyone does the same tests, and whoever does best gets the job. So that's what they did. They picked the best people they possibly could, on the basis that this would give them the best team, the best group of people they could possibly have. But then 9/11 happened. And this was a bit of a shock, because there was a lot of navel gazing about how can the best resourced, best equipped intelligence agency in the world that consistently recruits the very best people fail to predict this, fail to prevent it from happening. So there was a lot of thought and analysis after the event to try and understand how had they failed so badly. Well, when they were trying to review what went on, what they realized was that they had collective blind spots. And they hadn't really considered Osama bin Laden or Al Qaeda to be that significant a threat. And they'd been watching these types of news reports and they think, well, here's a person in a cave. They've got primitive weapons. They're wearing simple clothing. They're speaking in poetry. None of these things seem like a very big threat. But what they were missing was what all of these signals meant to bin Laden's followers. You know, the cave was very significant religious messaging. The clothing was carefully selected. The primitive weapons show a certain level of authority. And speaking in poetry is a type of language that puts you on a pedestal. So essentially what they were looking at here was like a president standing in the White House, with a crest. It was that type of messaging, but collectively they couldn't see it. And the reason for that was that each of the individuals in the team was the most capable individual they could find. But what they'd done is they'd systematically recruited for the same thing. You know, they had recruited the cleverest people. So they'd gone to Ivy League universities. They wanted to get the fittest people from the sports teams, the people with the best degrees. And inadvertently, that meant that they had basically recruited a whole bunch of young, white, rich men from a particular part of the United States. And all of their experiences and expertise overlapped. And that meant that collectively, they had some really significant blind spots. And this idea that we attract people who are like ourselves, and we maybe recruit people like ourselves, and we develop recruitment processes that inadvertently favour people who are like ourselves, has a name. And this is known as amyphily. And I might be pronouncing that wrong, so I apologise. But it's basically this idea that you're not intentionally excluding others, but through what you do, you automatically are attracted to and recruit, and people like you feel comfortable in your organisation. So you end up drawing homogeneous groups together. So that was our first case study. And what I want to do is to reflect on that a little bit and think, well, how does that relate to error? And how does that relate to our industry? So what we're going to do is put you into breakout groups for 10 minutes. And there'll be probably 5 breakout groups, I think, from the number of people in the group. So 5 breakout groups. So please, when you go into your breakout group, talk to each other and then pick one person in the breakout group to note down your answers on the mural board. So navigate to this area here. I'll just pull you all to the right area so it happens to be pointing at the right bit. And what I'd like you to do, please, is think about this question by trying to answer 2 questions, or do 2 things. Firstly, share any examples of where homophily or groupthink has occurred that you know of. You know, in construction, where have you seen groups of similar people sticking together? And secondly, share any examples where you've seen errors that after the event looked obvious, but nobody spotted before they happened. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Well, I'm hoping that you had some interesting discussions there. I know in the group I was in, it was certainly quite a challenging discussion, so that was excellent. Let's go round and just see what answers different groups had. And let's start with Breakout Group 5, if we can, please. So I'll zoom in on my screen, and can someone from Breakout Group 5 please just tell us what you talked about? Just a quick 30-second explanation, please. So, who is in Group 5?
So I was, and you have to excuse all of the spelling mistakes because I couldn't actually see what I was typing in order to have it on both, be able to see people and type. So we talked about a number of things, which was ranging from so things like CDM 2015. Quite often the designers looking at our safety are predominantly white males of a certain age, certain demographic, and therefore when they're thinking about safety on site, they don't necessarily think about all ranges of different human abilities, etc., when designing for safety. That brought us on to talk about things like PPE. So again, PPE has traditionally been designed for a certain sort of stature, etc., of individuals. We're getting better at gender PPE, but there are things around culture, maternity, gender neutral, these kind of things, face-fitting masks that fit faces other than a white Caucasian male, etc., etc. So again, a lot of design and homogenization in that safety for design. We also talked about army barracks, etc. That the people designing for army barracks were generally older family individuals who were then designing for single white males, and necessarily there was a disconnect between the two. And I can't think what the other thing was that we commented on. There was one other.
So if anyone else from the group wants to jump in, then please do.
An example of road layout design that unintentionally favoured male commuters over female commuters, because nobody had looked at the different commuting patterns in that society at that time, and evidenced in various things, but certainly a book, Invisible Women. So it wasn't or more one, something that's just been read.
Brilliant. Great, thank you. Thanks, Rob. Okay, let's see what Breakout Group 4. Let's hear from you. Any thoughts from your group on what you considered? Who have we got from Breakout Group 4?
Okay.
We in 4. I don't know who's in 4.
I was trying to work out who's 4. That was us. Right. Well, I wrote these, trying to pick up on the discussion. We talked about, we were struggling with the concept of the group think and the people, but we first of all thought about the team that gets together at settling estimates and tenders tends to be kind of senior people, and do we include all the people that could have a good input to the errors that sometimes are made in tenders and settlements, because the errors are always spotted later on by the person who's got to place the order, and then it's too late. So maybe we need to be more diverse at the tendering and estimating stage. There was then a discussion about how we don't take full account of the different countries and places people come from that we put to work in construction. So we issue information which is understandable to naturally English speaking people who've got good eyesight and all that sort of thing, but quite often we're trying to communicate that to people for whom English is not their first language, and we only start to realize the impact of that when they're doing it wrong. So we need to be more inclusive when we're putting our information together to make sure it's understandable and accessible to people and spot the error before it occurs. So there are various examples we talked about with asbestos and things like that you don't necessarily spot early on, which you should do, but I think that was the gist of our conversation.
Great. Okay, thank you. Let's skip on to group 3. We'll have to keep it relatively short just to make sure we cover everything. But group 3, what were the headlines that you considered? Not sure if anyone from group 3 is there. So interesting that we've got membership of industrial bodies. So actually, in order to be a chartered engineer, you have to be part of the club. So possibly there's a discrimination. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, that wasn't my point. I think I might just be the only one that can see the mural in our group. But
Okay.
somebody made the point that how do we control working in silos, and the exclusivity element of being part of an industry body that gives you that kudos and gives you more development opportunities. But if you're potentially having to pay to be part of that body, if you need a certain level of education to get into it, how do you stop all the same minds being in the same room together?
Interesting, really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Shall we quickly go up to group 2? Let's hear from group 2. We've got lots of post-its here, so who can tell us what group 2 talked about? So we've got go ahead.
I think we sort of had that a general feeling of, in terms of the question of sharing any examples of homophily or groupthink, was sort of like just that general, well, the whole industry is very, white male dominated, and that you just look into any design team meeting or anything like that, and you see it straight away. And then there are a couple of examples of errors being made. One was brought up, the use of drones for surveys, as being something that was, I guess maybe not errors being made, but was seen as something by the old guard as, oh no, we're never going to use that. Nothing beats people, people doing it this way and that way. Whereas actually it's younger generations who are bringing through fresh voices that are starting to make change that isn't there in the industry naturally.
Brilliant. Okay, great. So yeah, and that idea of homophily can possibly stop new ideas from being adopted. It sounds like it's a barrier. Brilliant. And then it's just group 1. So I know I was in group 1, but I'll ask someone else, please, to say any of the headlines from our group. Who's going to talk?
Nick, there's no post-its I'm seeing in that group.
No, you're right. We failed to put the post-its on, so we'll. So I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe Simon, you can talk to us about what we covered.
Sorry, yeah, we spent a lot of the time talking about the homophily and examples of, or poor examples of homophily. Talking about sort of glass ceiling being predominantly white male, women, other races not coming through. Roles are quite often defined by the professions that you're in. The HR, the human resources, the back room, the admin teams, the environmental sectors are quite often more female-based. As regarding errors, we talked about groupthink, where a team consistently used the same safety factors when measuring what they had to do for masonry, and it was only one of their contractors that was consistently challenging it, that they actually got it around their heads. They weren't actually right at the time, but they'd always done it that way, so they carried on doing it that way. And I was too busy writing it down to think about putting it on the post-its, I'm afraid.
Brilliant, thank you. And Catherine and Fiona, I don't know, do you want to add anything?
Oh, sorry, I think one of the other things we were looking at is just that the way that you get a different perspective if you're in the minority, because you are ticking the box by being there for other people, but you're not necessarily seeing anyone like you. So the disproportion is more obvious.
Really interesting. Thank you. Okay, well, it's fascinating to hear, the sort of how loud and clear that message is coming through in terms of lack of diversity in the construction industry. You know, that's a pretty clear message that's come out of every group. But what I'm going to suggest is that maybe there are two levels on which we can think of this. Well, maybe not levels, but two things we want to think about. And I suggest that one of the things we want to do is make sure that we're achieving diversity of thought with the people who are in the room already. So pausing on the issue of we have not got the right people in the room, clearly that is a very big issue. But before we get there, maybe we want to think about this idea that from within the room, are we getting everyone's opinions? So we could say, and this is for discussion, maybe we've got an objective to achieve diversity of thought within the team we've already got by creating culture where everyone who is there is empowered to think for themselves and speak up. So this is pausing on the big issue of having the right people in the room. So what I wanted to do was just touch on what GIRI do at the moment, not to increase diversity, but to engage everyone who is already involved with the construction industry. So this focuses very much on what we do within our supervisor and manager training. So how do we train the people who supervise work on site? And one of the big things that we teach is this idea of helpful disagreement, allowing people to disagree and making sure that you hear everyone's opinion and avoiding this danger area here of unhelpful agreement. So that could be a bit like your groupthink, where everyone is nodding, nobody is raising questions, nobody is raising challenge. And that's one of the things our training focuses on. How do you create helpful disagreement? And one of the ways that our training in GIRI focuses on this is through our language and the way we use questions. So we don't just transmit a message, but we see communication as a closed loop. So you have to communicate some information and then get feedback. And it's only the feedback that is the effective communication. And we know that one of the magic tricks we've got up our sleeve is the use of open questions consistently. So that whenever you hear a yes, no answer, we want people to have an alarm bell that goes off that says, that doesn't verify that someone has understood or someone actually agrees with me or doesn't think something different. All it means is they're just trying to get me to shut up and go away. So we want to use these open questions, the when, where, who, what, why, how type questions. So I would suggest that in terms of promoting diversity of thought from within the people who are in the room, that's something that that the GIRI training currently does. But what we want to do now is go on and look at a second case study. So in this case study, we're looking at what are some of the possible impacts of lack of diversity. And from hearing the conversations already, I'm sure some of you will have heard of this case study, but we'll run through it and see what you reflect. So let's, instead of going over to the US, this time we'll go to Sweden for our case study. And in Sweden, they have lots of snow. And that means that snow and ice clearance policy is a big issue. You know, every council puts a lot of time and effort into their snow and ice clearance policy. And for many years, most regions had a very clear-cut policy. We prioritise clearance of main arterial routes. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, that's where most of the traffic goes. Those are where all the important journeys take place. That's how you link up centres of economic activity. So that is how their snow and ice clearance policy was developed. We prioritise clearance of arterial routes. But those decisions were made by the people who were in charge. And unsurprisingly, most of those decision makers were professional males. And those professional males did a twice daily commute in their car. Every morning they would drive to their place of work. They'd make decisions about what is the priority for snow and ice clearance. Funny old thing, it's where I drive my car. And then they'd drive home again. So those were the decision makers who made the seemingly obvious decision to prioritise clearing the main arterial routes. However, over time, diversity was improving within those decision makers. and started to include females. And when there was a critical mass, these decision makers started to question the snow and ice clearance policy and go, does this really make sense? And the perspective was slightly different. Instead of just thinking about the twice daily commute in a car, more consideration was given to walking in the local area, for example, getting children to school, elderly people moving a pushchair, possibly cycling. And so study was conducted to see actually what are the main problems when you have snow and ice. And what was found was that hospital admissions in Sweden, this was I think just in Stockholm, hospital admissions for pedestrians when it was snowy and icy were 3 times as high as the hospital admissions from motoring in snow and ice. So there's a big disparity here. You go, well, this is where all the accidents are happening, but we're prioritising snow and ice clearance on the main arterial routes where there don't seem to be many accidents. And so the policy was changed to instead prioritise pedestrians as well as the arterial routes. And what they found was that this actually created a huge cost saving. I think it was more than 4 times the amount saved in hospital bills compared to what they spent on the snow and ice clearance. And the important thing with this is that the original decision makers weren't intentionally being nasty, but they just completely failed to see these other options. To them, it seemed obvious that you prioritise the main roads. So there's a question here, isn't there, about, well, what does that mean for us? If we've just identified that our construction industry is predominantly old white males, sort of almost characterising what we described as the Swedish decision makers from 40 years ago, what is it that we're not noticing? And what are the errors that we're making that we don't even know we're making because we just haven't got that perspective? Well, there's a way we can think about this, draw a simple picture, and we can think about it in terms of the problem space. So these rectangles, you might say, well, these are all the skills and things that might be useful for what we're doing. So if we are doing a repetitive process, we're building the same type of structure again and again and again, it might be logical to say, well, actually, the team that did it last time did a good job. We want the same team again. So it might be fair enough to go, well, do you know what? We just want this group of people to do this job because we know they're good at it. And actually adding someone with a completely different skill set might have limited benefit. But that's because we can define this problem space. We know exactly what the challenge is. But when we think about construction now, I would suggest that actually our problem space, the challenges that we're dealing with, are changing significantly. I mean, we know we've got the climate crisis. We know digitization is coming in rapidly. We're having to adopt new materials, largely due to shortage of materials and carbon intensity of old materials. We're starting to use offsite manufacture. We're going to have to repurpose a lot of our existing buildings, and our user requirements are changing very rapidly. So, question, is it reasonable to assume that a bunch of people who have been working in the construction industry for a very long time have the skill sets to deal with that new problem space? Are they able to understand what is required? So that leads us on to our next breakout group activity. And for this one, we're looking at what perspectives is the construction industry currently missing. And for that, I'd like you please to focus on two sort of sub-questions to discuss in your groups. Firstly, what are the big changes facing the construction industry? I've already listed some, you might want to just skip over that bit. And then what perspectives, experiences and skills may the industry be lacking? We've heard a lot about gender, and that's obviously a key one. And what else is the industry currently lacking? So let me do a quick time check. Let's see, how long have we got? So yeah, let's go for another. Can we go for 6 minutes, please, Helena, for the breakout groups?
Yeah, that's fine.
Just to try and finish on time. So we'll go back into the breakout groups for just 6 minutes. If you can please discuss those issues, and then put some sticky notes on, and then we'll nominate someone from each group. If you can pick someone from each group, please, to just explain what you think. What are the big challenges, and what perspectives and experiences and skills do you really think the industry is missing? One of group one, please, to give a 30-second summary of the complicated and diverse conversations we were having.
Yeah, I'll go with that. So we were talking a lot about the things that were missing at our industry, potentially from other industries. And I was talking about, I've come from a farmer background, so nothing to do with construction until very, very recently. So I think that was a big thing. And also just looking at the human factors, you know, people that understand people can understand and can take a wider perspective and bring it into the construction industry. So there was a few different things going on there.
Brilliant, thank you. Great. Let's jump on to group two. Who is in group two? We've got lots of nicely coordinated, color coordinated post-its from you. That looks great. Let's hear from group two, please.
So one of the examples we put in was about, one of the challenges listed was about repurposing buildings. So then we talked about the accessibility and the skills and experience or perspectives might be lacking for that challenge is around engaging, you know, with local community groups around what their needs are for the accessibility side of things.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah. Anything else from your? We've got interesting. You've talked about reassessing value. That's probably more than a 30-second discussion, that one, but.
Yeah, well, I'll try and be quick on that one, but that was about I sort of said certainly from the last company I came from, the EDI is not hurting enough, you know, like carbon, you know, things like that. So it's from clients or from contracts, it's not an issue because it's not causing a pain just yet. So then Mike sort of said, yeah, well, you know, maybe we should sort of reassess the value we put on it.
Interesting. Great. Thank you. Let's go to group three for a quick update from you. What did you consider?
Yeah, we each kind of came up with an option, but I think a key message was kind of looking at potentially how other countries are doing this, whether there's a need to learn from kind of the past mistakes in terms of, well, not mistakes, but oversights. Just the one I would know best, the one that I added is the social value one at the end, which sort of touches on what Holly just said, which is are we moving towards a space where we're quantifying EDI initiatives in a different way, and there's more pressure on projects and organisations to justify the resources they're investing in this and the outcomes of it.
Brilliant, thank you. Interesting. Let's go to group four. What you covered.
Hello. So I think the big change we'll be facing imminently is climate change and how that's going to impact our industry in terms of everything we do, really. Focusing on one thing in particular, technology. So, you know, that's talking about the machinery on site, the things that we're using, the materials we're using on site, the way we have to record things and manage things. We need a lot of technical expertise to do those things. Now, already, I feel there is a gap in terms of technical training for a lot of people and ability. You know, they're just natural skills, and you know what I might find quite easy to use on a tablet, the guys on site really struggle with, and we have to go through a lot of training and understanding. So I think coming around the corner is there's going to be more new materials and innovations that we'll need to be training people in or trying to show them how to use, and I think that's going to be a big hurdle for our industry, trying to keep up with the changes. It's very hard.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that sounds like it's linking back through to our education, our recruitment, and all the big. Yeah. How does that flow?
Yeah, because you think there's a lot of guys on site who, you know, they've worked their way up through the years, they've been on the tools all their lives, and now they're being expected to use tablets on site when they might not even know how to use a computer. It's quite a big hurdle for them, but they're very good at their jobs, you know. So I think, yeah, it's difficult.
Interesting, thank you. Let's hear from group 5, final group here. So what were your thoughts, please?
So we talked a bit about the fact that some of this can be dependent on the size of the project. So the size of the project will dictate how many people you've got working, client and contractor side. And if you've got more people able to work, you're able to have specialists in each area, which can support some of this. A smaller project, you wouldn't necessarily have that. So each person needs to be a jack of all trade. And if they're in their original education, they've never covered any of these things, environmental or accessibility, etc., then it's very hard for them to bring that to the table. And then they'll be commenting on designs without the empathy to understand what they are commenting on. So there was an example around antisocial behaviour, and we happened to have a Metropolitan Police there to talk about security, but actually he had an appreciation and experience of it and therefore could comment on it. But if he hadn't been in the room, no one could comment on it. And I think that comes down to language, that a lot of the training here will be about how to understand what is the right language to use when talking about some of these aspects, and making sure that that's a comfortable space. So if you get it wrong, that it's not, you're not treated as discriminatory, etc.
Really interesting, thank you. And it sounds, from what you were saying there, it almost sounds like it could be almost killing two birds with one stone, in that if your language and environment is, tell me if I get the words wrong, but if your language and environment is inclusive and open, you will enable people to speak up and you'll get those good ideas heard. But also, you might be creating an environment where people are comfortable if they're from a diverse background as well. So it sounds like it could be doing two things. It could be increasing the amount of diversity in your group and increasing the ability of people to speak up and hear that diversity of thought within your group. So it sounds like it's sort of a double whammy if you can change that language, that attitude, that safe space as you used. Really interesting. Okay, good. I can see you nodding there, Rob. Do you want to add to that?
I agree with all of it. That's why I was nodding.
Cool. So interestingly, it sounds, from everything that people have been saying, it sounds a bit like our industry is an oil tanker, and it keeps doing what it's always done, and our, the people in it are the people who've always been in it, and our supply chain is our supply chain. So at the heart of this, there's sort of a challenge about change. How do we create an environment where we can change and we can adapt? So I'm going to have a bit of a segue now and dive into biology, which as a structural engineer is quite a long way from my comfort zone, but let's go for it. So what is it that we can learn from nature? Well, let's ask Darwin, because he's the one who certainly is credited with the book. So it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. So that's the basis of the theory of evolution. In order to adapt, basically the ability to adapt is what gives you an advantage. And this is underpinned by the idea of the evolutionary tree. And a number of things are going on here. So from one generation to the next, basically the information is carried from one generation to the next. So it's always quite similar to what happened before. But crucially, you have these little branches. So new things are tried. And that is what creates this ability to evolve, the ability to change. And from a Get It Right initiative perspective, we're basically all about culture change in order to prevent error. We are saying the industry needs to change because at the moment we make too much error, we need to change. So we can look at this model and say, well, what we need to do is we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're not going to forget everything we previously learned. But we also need to have these little branches off and be able to change as well. So to paraphrase a bit of biology, evolution requires 4 prerequisites. The ability for an organism, an organization, a group, whatever it is, a process to improve requires 4 things. First, you need heredity. So this idea that things that work are carried forward to the next generation. So in construction, we can pretty much just say that's experience. We need experience so that we're not reinventing the wheel every time we do something. But crucially, we also need variance. So we need new ideas to be introduced. And that's a lot of what we've been talking about today, is that diversity, getting those new ideas. But the other things we need, the third thing we need is competition. So that means that we need feedback so that successful ideas are repeated and failures are dropped. So we can all sort of think of an example of maybe a designer who repeatedly designs something. The design is rubbish, but they never get feedback, so they keep churning out the same design. So that would be an example of where you don't have feedback, you don't have competition. And then the fourth element for evolution is repetition. You need to do something lots and lots of times. That's why fruit flies evolve really quickly and elephants don't, because you get a new fruit fly every few days, you get a new elephant every 40 years. So we can look at those and say, well, actually, if we want our industry to be able to improve in order to avoid error, we need these four things. We need heredity, we need the experience, but crucially, we also need to match that with the variance. And in terms of why is diversity important, I just wonder if it's interesting to look at it in this perspective, in terms of that evolutionary model. I don't know, has anyone any reflection on that? Is that a useful model, or you know, has anyone come across something like that before? I don't know. Any observations? Well, we'll make that our second big. Yeah, go for it.
And so one thing I was going to say is I think that with the speed difference between, say, evolution and societal change, heredity and variance potentially in sort of modern societies can quite often come into conflict with each other, if that makes sense. I don't know, unless I misunderstood the terms.
No, I think they very much do come into conflict, and it's the idea of, so I always think of it in a construction sense as you've got the old experienced person in the office who says this is how we've always done it, and you've got the new enthusiastic person who says let's try something new. And you're absolutely right, there is a conflict there, but what evolution would say is you need both. And what I would suggest is that the industry probably needs both. You know, we are not going to be a successful construction industry if we say, do you know what, let's get rid of all the engineers, get a bunch of 5-year-olds and say get on with it. It's, you know, that might not be enough. Now I see a comment from Fiona. What's your comment? Are we selecting out interest in biology? You know, and yeah, interesting one, Fiona. I think that's a very, very good point. Yes. Why am I able to talk about biology? If you'd all done biology GCSE, you probably wouldn't be listening to me right now and say, shut up, Nick, we know this. Yeah.
I thought the repetition was interesting, because as an individual in the construction industry, you can work on if you work on a major project, that can be 5-6 years before you get a chance to then get a repetition of it. And it's, I guess, events like this where trying to share knowledge between different people enables repetition quicker across the industry rather than individual repetition as it was.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah. Anyone else? Any reflections on that idea of repetition? Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. You'll go. Yeah.
That aspect of repetition is very visible if you're an engineer working outside London. It always used to seem that graduates in London had more cycles and more learning and therefore more opportunities. So there's an issue around social mobility in terms of people's willingness and ability to move location. It's not just about getting some good jobs into a city. It's about having opportunities to move on and experience different projects there.
Interesting. So we talked about repetition as a personal level, and then we've also maybe got repetition at a organizational level, an industry level, but we're probably diverging away from diversity, ironically enough. So let's go back on. So we might have this as our second sort of objective. We could say, well, actually, we need to combine experience and diversity. and that balance of heredity and variance is required to enable adaptation, so that teams and processes can improve. And it's interesting, the word that was brought up there is that in terms of a conflict between that experience and diversity. And yeah, that's a really interesting way of viewing it. So we have looked at diversity, and a lot of it comes down to how can we see the world differently. And I have bullet pointed without much thought a bunch of different ways that we might think of diversity. So we've got gender, race, physical abilities, age, work experiences, the subjects you study, sexual identities, nationality. But is there anything that I've missed? Is there anything particular, thinking about the construction industry, that we should be noticing in terms of diversity, or considering in terms of diversity, that we're currently not? Anyone just shout out.
Nick, I would put this issue of being able to move in there, that there is this difference between those amongst our society and those amongst our profession who can move location and those who can't. So again, that factors in things like Hinkley Point is staffed by people who were able to move to West Somerset, but the local job workforce that's developed around Hinkley Point aren't necessarily in a position to move to Suffolk or Cumbria or wherever the next nuclear construction industry project is.
Interesting. Thanks, Fiona. Anything else that we really should be considering?
So
yes, just quickly. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Just quickly, that we've got some real horrors coming in on politics. You know, politics. There's great diversity and difference between people that are the same sort of sexual identity, same physical abilities, mobility, age. They're in there, but there are in each of those these really horrible, political diverse situations. They're inner things, they're covert things that are hidden, and you know, they're being driven by ultra factions within the society anyway. I don't know how we deal with it. So
okay. And you're sort of describing there that politics it's not so much the diversity of politics, but more the politics can be a threat to diversity, I think. Is that what you're...
between people that look the same and that are the same, but they're not really the same inside, you know.
Yeah. Interesting. Thanks. And Claire, you mentioned about the bridging the gap between design and construction. Do you want to expand on that, Claire?
Yeah, hang on, someone's replied to me as well. Someone agrees with me, that's good. Yeah, I think this goes back to what we've looked at in previous GIRI groups, isn't it? Where we know there is a gap between a lot of companies with design and construction. So there's an awful lot of knowledge and experience the construction teams have that the design teams don't necessarily have, because they're not on the ground building it, you know, building from the ground up. And I think, you know, it goes the other way around as well. Like, the construction team don't understand the complexities behind what the design team do. Now, not quite sure what the answer is to that, but I thought I'd throw it out there because I know it is an issue in our industry, whether there needs to be some sort of training or something, you know, the construction teams have to go through before they start building. I don't know what the answer is, but it's just being more aware of each other's worlds, really, isn't it? Those two teams, and yeah.
And interestingly, going back to the point about mobility, why does someone leave university and then choose to go in one box or the other? It's very interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple of other comments. We've got caring responsibilities. Okay, so I'll put that in. Yeah, caring responsibilities. Go for it. Who's Okay, well, I'm sure we can explore this a lot more, but let's jump ahead now. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and just have a look at this final question. And what I suggest we do is we tick off these questions in the chat box, because that way all of us can throw our thoughts in the chat box. We can see what each other think and we can just pick out a few ideas. What we'll do, first question, how can we improve diversity of thought in our existing teams? Anything we can do to improve diversity of thought in our existing teams? Interesting. So we've got Simon there. You said stop the leaders giving their suggestions first. Do you want to expand on that? Have you seen that work? Simon, did you?
Oh,
did,
sorry.
Yeah.
If you've got a leader that says, I think we ought to do this, and then you've got everybody else will go, we want to keep our jobs, we're going to agree, we're not going to question, and tap the forelocks, and it's not necessarily the best, it's not necessarily the worst, but it's the solution that you go for.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And Rob, you talked about educating teams on diversity of thought in the first place. Have you seen that? Have you got any examples of that?
So yeah, we're part of it's on a course I'm teaching at the moment. We run a little bit of it, and what you find is people are, professional people are very resistant to the concept that they're not diverse of thought until you actually start talking to them about it, and suddenly sort of light bulbs come on and people start realizing stuff. But that actually takes you to get them to talk about it in the first place.
Interesting. Okay, and a lot of these comments that are coming in that I'm reading through, I hope you all are, is it's all about the way we interact with each other. It sounds like it's, what type of question are you asking? What order are you getting people to contribute? How do you value what someone says? So it's really interesting that at the heart of this is how we interact with one another, and it goes back to that idea that then you get the double whammy of getting the right thought from people, but also creating that inclusive environment that hopefully breaks down some of the barriers. Let's jump on now to the next question. So that is, what can we do to counter homophily and groupthink? I think it might be the same question, to be honest, as we've just covered. But if you've got any other thoughts on that, how can we counter that homophily, having like-minded and similar people grouping together and all having the same ideas?
I was going to say, just like the enforced breakouts, if you put different people together that don't know each other and they have to speak about something, that's quite a good way, instead of picking teams, you put people together.
So proactively managing it. Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Catherine. Anyone else want to suggest? So we've got Cliff talking about reconsider recruitment strategies. I'm sure a few people might have something to say about that. Fiona, deliberately seek diverse contributors. Public conversation is amazing. Do you want to talk about that, Fiona? Deliberately seeking diverse contributors. Do you want to expand on that?
I think a lot of it is if you're going looking for someone you wouldn't normally talk to. So again, it's something we quite often do in interdisciplinary work with students, making them work with people from a different subject. So there's some fantastic interdisciplinary projects, particularly in the departments that work across construction. So architecture and civil engineering together, architecture and built environment together. And that produces very different outputs in design work than when you've got groups of engineering students working together. But you can also do it just by, in terms of who you look for as co-authors on papers, in terms of who you look for to review it, that you go to somebody else. So I'm also think with the community engagement, we often perceive people to be NIMBYs when in fact they've got specialist knowledge of their own backyard that we can't pick that up in one site visit, and they've lived there for 40 years and we're not actually asking them where the spring appears in the winter rain, and we're just missing so much knowledge because we don't go and ask.
Brilliant. Thank you. Now we are at the end. We've run out of time, I'm afraid. I've put the final question in the box. Please do type your answers in the box, and it's an opportunity then so we can all read each other's answers, but we won't talk about them anymore. But I will hand back to Cliff. Just to let you know, we can run these forums for your companies. So if you're interested in this forum or any of the other forums, please do get in touch with GIRI. We can run them for your company. But I'll hand back to Cliff now, and thank you very much from me for all of your contributions.
Hello, I'm back. Yes, I've got about less than a minute. Well, we're over a minute. Just to say thanks, Nick, as ever, very interesting. I hope everyone got a chance to air their thoughts and reconfirm their thinking in some ways, but also learn some new things. I certainly did. I ran through this with Nick this morning, and I'm still struggling with some of the concepts. But I've been in construction for 40 years, so I have seen a few of the ups and downs. But I'm learning every day. If you don't learn something new every day, you're not moving forward. And so this type of discussion is really useful to us all, I think. The great benefits of diversity are becoming more and more obvious to us all the time. This whole meritocracy argument is losing traction throughout education and society, and I think that's important. And this whole adapting to change, absolutely got to be done. We've got to be good at it, and we've got to change. So let's move forward. Please do join us at GIRI if you're not already members, and if you are members, come to the members meeting. But as Nick says, we'd love to do these forums more widely. They're all part of the learning process that is so important to everybody. So thank you very much for your time, and goodbye.